All right, I've changed around our schedule a little bit, moved things back a little. So Monday, we went over Chapter 12. Yesterday, we went over Chapter 13. Today, we're going over Chapter 15. But what I've decided to do is, rather than throw a ton of stuff at you today, I'm going to lecture today on Chapter 15. We're going to get through the whole chapter. Tomorrow, we're going to spend about an hour, and we're going to write a JavaScript application. The interface is going to be unbelievably unspectacular. It's going to have a button on it. That's going to be it. But it's going to allow us to do some major operations using arrays. Then on Friday, we're going to rewrite the same program, but we're going to rewrite it using the newer ES5 and ES6 array methods. So you can see the difference between using the two. This will basically be, for lack of better words, your pretest. Because if you understand how to use arrays, you should be pretty good. All right? All right, then next week, notice Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday will just be labs. So I moved that back, and I moved the test to Thursday of next week. All right? Then Friday will be lab. Then notice when we come back the next week, you'll have 14 and 16. We're going to do that Monday and Tuesday. But then notice, and this might even be pushed back. I don't know, but there's going to be a bunch of lab in there, just so you know. Don't worry about that stuff that's pushed into November for now. All right? Okay. So with that said, let's just jump into Chapter 15. So again, we've now done everything in Section 1, everything in Section 2, and 12 and 13 from Section 3. As I mentioned to you previously, I think 12 and 13 go well with 15. So, in other words, when you take your test a week from tomorrow, what will be in there from Chapter 12? Well, you'll be expected to know how to use numbers, but you already do. All right? You may or may not, because I haven't written the test yet. I'm going to do that this weekend. But you may or may not have to use some of the string methods. But again, the point is you can go to W3 Schools, you can go to Hunlock that I've shown you, and there's plenty of other sites to find out information. All right. You can, will there be dates? I don't know. Maybe we'll do something with an employee type of thing, and there'll be a hiring date. I don't really know. All right. As far as control structures, yeah, you should be able to use the for loop, the while loop, the do while loop, etc. You should be comfortable using the if statement, the if-else if, the if-else if-else, the switch statement, etc. I am not going to be the kind of person who's going to say, no, when you do this part of it, you must use a switch statement. If you're more comfortable using an if, then you use an if. If you're more comfortable using a switch, you use a switch. I can guarantee you that there will at least be something in there with exceptions on it. So in other words, if you put in something out of range, I'll probably do what I showed you yesterday. I'll tell you to throw an exception type of an idea, a range error or whatever. All right. And as far as regular expressions, yeah, you might be able to, you might have like a search feature to search for something. I don't know. All right. But from today, the majority of what you're going to do on this test will involve arrays. I'm just telling you that right now. And what I'm looking at, probably at least, is there's only going to be one program you're going to write. But in 4 hours, it's not going to be a small program. Does that make sense to everyone? So you'll have to create the interface. And, am I going to ask you to do it with Bootstrap? If I do, it'll be minimal Bootstrap. Add it and make your buttons different colors or whatever. But that's not what this is about. This is about JavaScript, so that's what the test is going to focus on. All right? Okay, so let's jump into then Chapter 15. As they say here, Chapter 3, in Chapter 3, arrays were introduced. So we're going to get first a reintroduction to arrays. You may remember the arrays that we used previously. That was, like you said, back in 3, 4. You had that thing where you were putting in people's names and their test scores, and you were saving them to an array. All right? All right. At the end of the chapter, as mentioned, they'll talk about sets and they'll talk about maps. When we get to that point, I sent all of you yesterday, I sent all of you an email that had some links on it. All right, we're going to look at those. I've even got more links. Now, I've had people tell me in the past, you give us so much SH you-know-what that I don't have time to look at half of this stuff. Fine, then don't. But I'm trying to pluck out what I think is the best stuff. All right. Plus, I'm going to ask that at the end of near the end of the lecture today, I'm going to show you something where there's a thing online where you can take some courses for free, and I'm going to recommend that you sign up for it and that you go through a couple of these. They're about an hour each. Do you have to do it? You don't have to do a flaming thing. You know, I remember years ago, I went out with this woman, and she was into transcendental meditation. Never thought I'd be into that. I really wasn't, but I liked her. So we went to this thing on it, and this guy said, you know, in life, you don't have to do anything if you're willing to pay the consequences. And one guy raised his hand and said, you got to breathe. And he said, not if you're willing to die. And I thought, well, that's something, but he's right. So I'm going to show you this stuff. I'm going to make it available to you. If you choose to take advantage of it, fine. If you don't choose to take advantage of it, fine. I think it'll do nothing but help you as far as getting ready for what we're doing and what we will continue to be doing. Plus, one of the things I'm going to show you at the end in one of these free classes, again, it's about an hour, it's the stuff that will cover the last week or so of class. So if you want to jump start on what you're going to be doing a year from now in the AWD 1111 database-driven websites class, you might want to go through that. And if you say, you know, okay, but just not now, I get it. It's not a problem. All right, but again, I'm just going to put it out there for you. All right. So, an array is an object. What does that mean? Well, everything that we've dealt with other than arrays have been what's called, basically a scalar value. It only holds one thing. So in other words, if I had 50 students, and let's say we didn't know a lick about arrays. If I had 50 students and I wanted to come up with test scores, I would say student 1 test, student 2 test, and make 50 of them. And you could do that and make it work. It's not a problem. But imagine if I had 500 students. It'd be a little harder. Again, it could be done. All right. But what an array does is it allows you to have one thing, with a lot of components in it. All right. Where I live, all right, I live in Lake St. Louis, and if you go to the end of my driveway, there's a mailbox. Okay. My daughter lives in St. Peters. She's got to walk half a block, and they've got about 40 mailboxes right there for the whole neighborhood. All right. So what I've got is more a scalar value. What she's got is more an array. Does that make sense to people? I mean, I've shown you examples. I showed you that example with apartments, etc. I'm not going to run through that again. All right. Now, there's different ways that you can create an array, but they all basically work the same way. So let's take a look at this. All right. You can say const array name equals new array length. Okay. You can use const array name equal array dot of. You can use const array name equal bracket bracket. I'm going to recommend that literally 100% of the time you use this one. It's the easiest one to understand. It's the least typing. All right? And I don't know why you wouldn't. I mean, that's just me. I don't know why you wouldn't. So I'd recommend using an array literal. So you've seen things like this before, but just to show you this, if I come through here and I say, for example, const test scores equal bracket bracket, that's now an array. Now, in other programming languages, and Mr. Kotner could attest to this, for example, in C#, when you create an array, you've got to let the system know the type of data that will be put in there, and that's all that can be put in there. All right, so for instance, if you were going to do this, just to show you, like in C#, you'd say something like int bracket bracket test scores equal new int, and you'd have to give it a size. So let's say 50. But this is a strongly typed language, meaning you have to let it know what lives in there, just whole numbers. This is not. So you literally, when you create the array like this, so let's say with test scores, I wanted to put in 5 of them. All right, there's 5 of you in the class. One person got 100, one person got a 99, an 89, 70, and a 67. I'm just making those numbers up. They don't mean anybody. All right? So that's one thing that I could do right there. That's totally fine to do that and do it like that. Now, what if I didn't do that? You haven't taken the tests yet. So I can come in here, and now I can come back and I can say test scores 0 equal 100, etc. You get what I'm saying? We could do this. Let's just pretend for a second every one of you got 100 on the test. So I could come in here and say 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. I'm going to also recommend, because you want your array to possibly grow, shrink, etc., that just use let. All right? So if we have another person who joins the class, let's say somebody comes in here on one of those shadow attack days, and we're doing a fairly simple thing, so they take the test. All right? So they come in here and they take the test, and they don't know everything, so they get an 80. So what I'm saying is what you can do with arrays in JavaScript is you can add to them at any time. You can't do that in most other programming languages. But again, because of the fact, it's twofold. First of all, JavaScript is loosely typed. They let you do just about anything you want to do. All right? And second of all, arrays are basically, when the system goes and reconciles what it has to reconcile, it does it at runtime while the program's running. That's why you can add things. The other thing, let's just pretend for a second here. Let's just say that we put people. No, that's not even great. Let's just put stuff. I know that's a dumb name, but just so you know that. So I'm going to put stuff in here, and there's a reason I'm showing you this. Again, what you can do in JavaScript that you can't do in most other languages is let's just say that we were going to say your age was 24. All right, your salary was $45,000. Your marital status was false. All right, the day that you were born, again, I'm making this up, but let's just say it was March 30th of 2000. What I'm trying to get across to you is you can put different types of elements in here. Totally legit to do that. Not legit in most other programming languages. This is one of the few that allows you to both add to an array. You don't have to give it a size in most other programming languages. Rather than that array getting reconciled at runtime like it is in JavaScript, it's reconciled at compile time. So the system needs to know when it's compiling the program, how much space should I put aside for this? And you can't change it. So if I'd have another student that added, I'd have to create another array, copy over the first 5 things to that other array, then add a 6th one. Does that make sense? You don't have to do that in JavaScript. All right? And again, I've said this to you before, it's why a lot of people love the language, and it's why a lot of people hate the language. All right? But I like it because it's typically what's referred to as being very extensible. You can stretch it. It's kind of silly putty or whatever you want to call it. All right. So there's other syntaxes, but notice in here that when we do this, if you say new array like this, so if we had done this, so I'm going to just go back to this for a second. So had we said let stuff2, let's say, equals new array, it's got to be a big A in there, and let's say we wanted to put all this stuff in there. I'm just going to grab it from here. So I'm going to put it here, 24, 45,000, false, grab that because that's too much to do. We'll just leave it right there. Okay, I'm just going to put in that stuff. That's enough. If I were to do it inside of using this syntax, then you'll notice I use parentheses instead of brackets. Now, is that a big thing? No, because if I want to go and fill it up down here, I still do it the same way. So I could copy that and put it down here. But I'm just showing you. That's why most people prefer this, whether you are going to initialize an array or you're not going to initialize it. It's just less typing. To me, it's more intuitive, and that's what you should be shooting for. All right? All right. So they show you this, and they say that you can, let me get rid of that. They say that you can come in here and create an empty array. You can give it a size, but you don't have to. So if we left that off, all right, we could still do this. The weird thing about this is, just so you know, and I probably mentioned this when we went over it before, but just in case I did not, let's just say we're going to use this one, this way of doing things. If I come in here and on the next line I type in stuff 100 equals hello. Kind of a dumb thing, but just so you see that. That means that the array has grown from having 4 elements, 0, 1, 2, and 3, to now having 101 elements. Does that make sense? And stuff 4 through stuff 99 all have a value of undefined. They're there, they just don't hold anything. That's all. All right? Well, what if I wanted to create an array? I'm just going to show you this right now. And I wanted there, so I'm going to come in here, I'm going to say this, const max students equal, let's just say that 500 is the most we can have. All right? So now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say let student array equal, all right, something like that. And I'm going to say bracket, and I don't have to give it a number. I'm just going to say bracket, bracket, something like that. Or I can give it 500. It doesn't matter. Or I can use max students. Does that all make sense? If I want to initialize all 500 of those, let's say it's going to be holding test scores, and there's 500 of them. I can now come in and write, for example, a simple for loop. For let LCV equal 0, LCV less than or equal to. Now we could say max students right here. We could do that. All right? But the way that you should do it is to say the name of the array dot length. It's basically, in that case, it's saying the same thing. And then plus plus LCV. Now if I do this and I say student array LCV equals 0. Can somebody tell me what did that do? Yeah, but I mean, even simpler than that. What is this line right here doing? That line. What is that doing? How many locations are there? 500. It's setting every one of those locations to 0. And that's a real fast way of doing it. Because if it was 1,000,000, all I'd have to do would be to change max students from 500 to 1,000,000. And it's still doing the same thing. So for loops are great for working with arrays. Because when you work with an array, typically you know the number of elements that you have. All right. If we did add more, we could always redo the loop down here or whatever. All right. So every single thing that's in an array, so here's an array of 3 names, Grace, Charles, and Ada. All right? And each one of those are known as array elements. Now you hear them read or whatever said in different ways. I would say this is how I learned it. So I'd say names sub 0. Sub is short for subscript. All right, so names sub 0 equal Grace. Names sub 1 equal Charles. Names sub 2 equal Ada. Some people read that as names element 0 equals Grace, names element 1 equal Charles, names element 2 equal Ada. It's just the wordage you decide to use. All right? But each one of those, as it says, is an element. The length of that array right now is 3. All right? It should make sense. All right. It says when you create an array and you don't specify the length, the array doesn't contain anything. So when you just say bracket, bracket, it's got nothing in it. You're probably going to get an error if you try to print it out, or at worst, and at best it'll just say like undefined. All right, maybe no, I don't know. All right. When you create an array with one or more elements and you don't assign values to them, each element is automatically undefined. So in other words, when we did this, if we just did these 2 lines right there, and we did not put in that for loop, now the student array would have 500 elements, each element would be undefined. That's exactly what they're saying right there. All right, so it says to refer to elements in an array, you use an index. They're 0-based. So the first array element is actually element 0. All right, if you've got 5 of them, the last array element is 4. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. This length is still 5. All right, but you always start counting with 0. All right, how to add or delete array elements. Now, what they show here is this is the easiest way to add something to the end of an array. And that's what they're showing right here. So notice they put const numbers equal 1, 2, 3, which means number sub 0 equals 1, number sub 1 equals 2, number sub 2 equal 3. Does that make sense? All right. But the length is 3. So if you tell it always to do numbers.length, well, what's the length? 3. So element 3 will now become 4. That's an easy way of doing it without you having to calculate anything. Now, I mentioned before that you can come in, when I showed you this initial example where we did this, where I said you can do this, it's hardly ever done, because why the heck would you want to do that? You know what I'm saying? All right, you can do it. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. So normally, with what they're showing in here, this is the way you'd want to do it, because it's just the easiest way of doing it. All right? When you add a number at a specific index, well, then notice 0, 1, 2, all right, we're putting something in 5, so there's nothing in 3, there's nothing in 4. That's why you get 1, 2, 3, undefined, undefined, 6. That can be very problematic if you start doing that kind of thing and you don't put values in there. All right. Notice there's different ways. So here's a way that you can delete things. Delete numbers sub 1. What does that mean? Well, that's deleting the value from there. It's not deleting the array element, it's deleting its value. So it has no value, meaning its value is undefined. The easiest way, when you want to get rid of an entire array, is to do this. Numbers.length equals 0. Boom. It's like you put bracket, bracket there. That's the easiest way. That's the recommended way. All right? They're mentioning that what I showed you before, as it says, they typically refer to that as a sparse array. Because notice there's something in the array contains 1, and then here, all right, it contains 1,001. So between 2 and 1,000, there's nothing, they're all undefined. And again, you can do that. There may be a reason for doing that. All right? So as it says, you add an element to the end of the array by using the array property. If you add an element at a specific instance, all right, that was when we did this, and you saw the undefined in here type of thing. To remove all, you set the array length property to 0. I just mentioned to you what a sparse array is. And it says, as you progress through this chapter, you'll learn additional ways that you can do things. So what they're showing you are fairly simplistic ways of doing this stuff. And again, to say simplistic is a relative term. You may be looking at this and go, I don't think any of this is simple. All right? And I think I told you that the first time I ever took a computer class where I had to actually write a program, we had to go and work with an array, and they said, calculate all the prime numbers between 1 and 1,000,000. It was something like that. I was like, I don't know what the frickin' array is. One guy, during the break, he said, I already wrote the pseudocode and the code for it while he was talking. They were all laughing at how simple it was. I had no idea what any of it was. What the hell is an array? So I went to the library and looked up an array. That's how I found it out. All right, we didn't have Google back then. All right, so different ways that you can go through loops in an array. And I've already shown you one of them. That's the straight for. So we'll look at that, and then we'll look at the for in, and we'll look at the for of. Again, all these loops with for in them are counting loops. So they all expect that they know exactly how many elements are in the array. Also with a for loop, usually you want to do something to every element that's in the array. Now, not always. You could put an if statement in there, etc. But usually you want to do something to all the elements. All right. So notice we've got 3 names in here, 0, 1, 2, and then we put in for 5 Alan. So we should have Grace, Charles, Ada, undefined, Alan. Does that make sense? All right. And here we're running through this. So I call it LCV for loop control variable. You can call it anything in the world you want. Equals 0, LCV or index less than the name of the array dot its length. Add 1 to it. Remember, you can say plus plus index, index plus equal 1, or index equal index plus 1. I would recommend you do it either the index plus plus or the plus plus index. This should allow you to access every element that's in the array. So you could check in there and you could say, if the name is equal to undefined, then maybe you want to set it to a default value. Unknown name or something like that. You could do that if you wanted to. All right. So this is using a straight for loop in here. Again, you know how to use a for loop. You've used a for loop, all right, on homework, and I believe you used it on your tests. All right. So notice there's also a for in loop, and there's also a for of loop. All right. So what's the difference? Well, when you work with the for in loop as opposed to the for of loop, it says here, the for in loop doesn't process undefined elements. The for and for of loops do. So you'd have a problem with the for in here. Notice it says Grace, Charles, Aiden, Allen. It did not show the undefined one. All right, where this one would show the undefined one or ones that are in here. All right, so it says you can use the for in, the for of to iterate. When you sing iterate, there means step through the array. All right, so in other words, if I set up an array for each one of you, and it had in there all 5 of your test scores. Let's say you've taken 5 tests, and all 5 of those test scores. And I didn't want those, but I wanted for each one of you, I wanted to loop through this. I don't care which one of these loops we use. Let's just say we used the regular for loop. All right? And then I said to add your 5 test scores together, divide by 5. I could get your test score average. That makes sense? Let's just take a look at how something like that would be written. All right? So I'm going to say let test scores equal some kind of an array. All right? I'm assuming now that for each one of you, I've got your test scores. Does that make sense? All right. So I could step through here and I could say for let LCV equals 0, LCV less than, in fact, we'll make this, we're going to say there's 5 test scores. All right, less than test scores dot length plus LCV. Bless you. And now I want to say that basically for each one of these, all right, and we're just going to say we have one person in here right now. I've actually made this harder than it had to be. But we're going to say something like this. Let's see. Total plus equals, we'll set total equal to 0. So let total equal 0. So total plus equals test scores LCV. All right, then when we fall out of here, we can say average, we'll put that up there in just a second, equal total divided by, so let's add a couple variables in here. So const num tests equal 5. All right, and we're going to make this num tests. All right. All right, so total equals this, so the average, so we'll let average equals 0.0. So this is going to be this divided by num tests. Does that make sense? So let's pretend for a second that this has got 5 tests in here. And you got better every time. So 78, 88, 93, 94, and 100. All right? So the first time through there, total is 0, right? Because we set it right there. So it's 0. And we add to it the first test score, which is this one. So it's now equal to 78. So the next time we go through there, we add in the next test score, which is 88, which if I did my math right should be 165. Then we go through it again, and we add the third test score, and I think that's 258. Then we go through it again, and we add the fourth test score. What is that, 352, I think. And then we finally go through it a last time, and we add a fifth test score. So that's 452. So that's total when we get done. Then we come down here and we say it equals 452 divided by 5, which is going to give us about a 90 point whatever, 90.4. Does that all make sense? That's how you would run through something like this. All right. And what typically throws people off and gets them confused is this. LCV is just a placeholder. It's going to hold the current array element number. That's all it is. It's not doing anything special. All right? Now, look through the examples, and if you go, you know what, I understand the for loop, I'm having problems with this for in and for, then don't use them. Anything you do with one of these loops, you can do with a straight for loop. I would consider this maybe not an advanced topic, but a medium topic, between beginning and advanced. All right? But they've got some stuff in here, and there's, again, go out to W3 schools if you want better examples than the ones I'm giving you. All right? Okay. This is a little confusing. All right. It says they're going to use 2 arrays in this example right here. First is one with totals, and second is one with full name. See that? So we've got these 2 arrays right there. So it says assign the first 3 elements in an array. What does that mean? So const this equal totals. Well, what the heck is that? All right. Well, what you are able to do when you destructure an array is only use the amount of the array you want to use. So that's what destructuring means. It means breaking it down. All right. Let's just take a look at a couple of the examples. Notice here, we've got first name and we've got nothing. So we're setting full name equal to the first name and just the last name. So in other words, we're skipping the middle initial in here. All right. Here as it says, assign the first 3 elements in an array. So, in other words, it says we want to go and add together, all right? It says assign the first three elements in an array. So total 1 is this, total 2 is this, total 3 is this. We're skipping that one. Now, before you go, that's fine. Why would you ever want to use this? Guess what? In a way, we use this at Rankin. Because if I go out right now and I look at whatever your average is in the class, all right, I go and look through your written tests and your actual hands-on tests, and I drop the lowest score. We don't have to do that. That's our prerogative, so I do it. So that's what we're doing in here. We're telling it that we have this, but I want to just remove one of them from there. So I'm doing some destructuring, basically. Now, this is where it gets a little confusing, and this is something they're going to explain later on in the chapter. Notice it says here, use the rest operator to assign some elements to a new array. What the heck does that mean? The ... basically means everything in between. This is a relatively new concept in here. You're going to see it in just a few minutes. All right? So, in the description here, you can assign the elements in an array to individual constants or variables using const or using let. Again, it's very rare that I use const with arrays. Now, there's certain things you can and can't do when you make a const. That's why I don't do it. I use let because then I can do whatever the heck I want to do with it and never have to worry about it. All right? Okay, it says when you destructure an array, you can either skip some elements in the array by adding commas as placeholders. All right, you can use the rest operator to assign the rest of the elements in an array to another array. So in other words, what if I had 10 students and I wanted to skip students 3, 4, 5, and 6? All right, so I could say 1, 2, and then I could say ... 7, like that, basically, and do it something like that. So there's different ways that this stuff can be used. So notice it says there, these were introduced in ECMAScript 2015. 2015 and 2016, where I believe ES5 and ES6 is what they're typically known as, there were tons of things added in here to try to make people's lives easier. We're going to look at some of those at the end of the chapter. All right? Notice when you destructure an array or a string, the original array or string isn't changed. Why? Because you assign it to something new. All right? All right. Some of the methods of the array type, and again, you're probably not going to remember these. But this is a page that you might want to dog ear or whatever, put a little folder, or if you're not going to do that, or if that's not your way, fine. If you don't want to do that, then, like I said, you might want to at least, put a bookmark on the W3 school site or whatever. So let's look at these. Push and pop work with the end of the array. All right, so push adds something to the end of the array, and it changes the length. It's kind of like you've got a line of people, so all 5 of you are in line, let's say, to go in to see the security person. And now I walk in at the end. I get pushed. I'm at the end. So instead of there being 5, there's 6. Does that make sense? All right. Pop removes things from the end of the array. Now before you say, well, there's also, notice there's a shift and an unshift. But push and pop both work with the end of the array. So you push on, you pop off. Okay? Then there's unshift and shift. Notice unshift adds something to the beginning of the array. It becomes the new array element 0. The size of the array gets increased by 1. The old element 0 becomes element 1. The old element 1 becomes element 2, etc. All right? So whereas push adds things to the end of the array, unshift adds them to the beginning of the array. Then we've got shift, which removes the first element. So it always removes element 0. And again, whereas pop pops from the end, all right, shift pops, so to speak, from the beginning. All right, those are the ones you could potentially use quite a bit. All right, then notice, because this gets confusing, there's splice, and there's slice. All right, I didn't make up these names. All right? The big difference between, and don't worry, we'll talk about these in a second, but the big difference between splice and slice, notice slice returns a new array. Splice allows you to cut into the original array and change it. Splice, many people will tell you, is quite dangerous. Just for that reason, because you can go and grab something out of the middle of the array and just remove it. And it is the original array that was removed. All right, you'll notice with splice, first it says start and number. Removes the number of elements given by the second parameter, starting with the first parameter. All right? So in other words, what it's saying in here is, if I have an array with 15 students in there, and I put in here 6, and I put in here 10, it's going to leave elements 0 through 5 and elements 11 through 14. Does that make sense? All right, and it'll remove all of the other ones. And it removes them from the original array. All right. The other splice that's in here says removes the number of elements from the second parameter, starting with the index given from the first parameter. That's the same, and replaces those elements with the ones given by a third parameter. So what you can do is kind of like a search and replace type of thing. All right? Whereas regular splice is like a search and cut. All right? And then slice, notice as it says, it returns a new array. All right? So why would this matter? Well, think about why you might want to use this. All right? I'm just going to make, again, this up. So I'm going to say we had 5 students who took tests, and they got a 78 and 83. One person did real poorly, one person did real well, and we'll put in here 59. All right? And what you're going to notice in just a couple minutes, because we're going to look at other things, but there's a sort that you can run in here. So I can run sort. Now I get 12, and I get 59, and I get 78, and I get 83, and I get 100. Everybody agree with that? Now, I can either run a sort like this, or I can run a sort and call what's called reverse right away. So now I get 100, then 83, then 78, then 59, then 12. Why might I want to do that? Maybe I want to just grab the top 2 scores as an example. So that's one way of doing it. And there's other ways as well. All right. So they give examples of using all of these in here. All right. Now, to be honest with you, you say, am I going to use all these for the test? No, not all of them. But I might, have you set something up where you can add a new employee, say, to the array. All right. Well, if I say add it to the end, you use a push, and typically that's the way you do it. All right. If I say remove a certain employee, you do a pop. All right. And there's more here. Again, some of these will be discussed again towards the end of the chapter. Index of returns the first index at which a parameter is found. So if I wanted to find out in that list I gave you before, let's pretend there was nobody with 100. But I wanted to find out how many what's the first student that got 100. Well, if it didn't find one, it would return -1. That means nobody got 100. But if it was the third student, it would return a 2. Does that make sense? Because remember the third one, 0, 1, 2 type of thing. All right? And you've got your choice. You can do the first index of, so that's the first one it finds, the last one it finds. You can do it includes. Notice it says returns a Boolean. You know what that means. True or false. So if I wanted to check to see if a certain score was in the array or a certain person was in the names array. All right? All right. There's find, as it says, returns the value of the first element that meets the condition. So that returns the element. Find index returns the element number, basically. All right. There's a filter. Returns an array containing all the elements that meet the condition of the function. So let's say I had that array with 500 test scores. And I wanted to, let's say I wanted to break it into two. So I wanted one that was called passed, and PASSED, and that's everybody who got, let's say, a 70 and above, and one that's called failed. I could go through the array twice, and I could filter it both times. And I could create a passed array, and I could create a failed array. That makes sense? All right. Every, as it says, returns a Boolean value that indicates whether all things meet a condition. So if I was only concerned, did everybody pass this test? All right. And again, true if everybody did, false if one or more people did not. All right. Some just says, did anybody pass the test? Or I could run some, did anybody fail the test? And again, it's going to return a Boolean. All right. Entries returns an iterator that contains key values for each element. The key is an index of the element. This one you're probably not going to use in here, but what you can do in JavaScript is you can create, typically we'll talk about sets and maps later, all right, but you can create the equivalent of a set or a map or even like a dictionary value. What's a dictionary value? Well, if I said to you, hey, Mason, what does iterator mean? Let's say Mason didn't know. And well, I'll tell you after the break. All right, so he goes out to dictionary.com and he types in iterator. Well, the key would be iterator. The definition would be the value, key values. So you can set things up like that. And quite often you do stuff like that where, as an example, let's say that you were all employees at a company. Your employee number would be the key. Your name maybe would be the value type of thing. All right. There's values. These are all iterators. You really don't have to worry about them for right now, okay? And the is array, notice it returns a Boolean. Says whether or not the object is an array or is not. So again, I'm just running through this, but if you want to see examples of all these, all right, they will be in the book, or again, you can go out to W3 schools. Methods that transform. Well, that should say to you that something that transforms has got the ability to change an element. All right, we're going to look at some of these more tomorrow. In fact, we're going to look at just about all this stuff. Some of these should just make sense. Well, for each, executes the function once for each element and returns a value of undefined. For each is just a for loop with less code you have to write, basically. All right. Join converts all elements of an array to string and concatenates them together. So if I had 5 names, all 5 of your first names, and I did a join, then rather than having an array with 5 elements in it, I now have a string. And I could say that I wanted a comma between each one. All right, so I'd have double quote Donald, double quote, comma, double quote Michael, double quote, comma, etc. All right. Sort is just that. All right. Reverses whatever. The newer ones are in here. So notice map. Executes a function once for each element and returns an array that contains the results of each function call. What the hell does that mean? Well, I literally could write a map function, and if I put enough stuff in there, I could return, let's say that I had 500 scores. I could have it go through there and run if statements, and if the score was between 90 and 100, I could have you add it to a new A's array. If it was between 80 and 89, I could have you add it to a new B's array. Get the idea? So we could create 5 new arrays, A, B, C, D, and F, if we wanted to do that. We're not changing the original array. We have to assign those to new arrays. All right? Reduce, as it says, executes a function and returns all the elements reduced to one value. What does that mean? The easiest way for that, remember I showed you that for loop before where we total up all those scores? We could also do that with less code using a reduce. You're going to see all this stuff in the next couple days. All right? Flat, as it says, returns an array with a nested array elements included. What does that mean? Well, we haven't even talked about this yet. It's possible to have arrays of multiple dimensions. And if you say, I have no idea what you mean, yes, you do. You've all seen a spreadsheet. That's a two-dimensional array. All right, rows going across, columns going up and down. All right, and it works the same kind of way. You can probably at least envision a three-dimensional array. But you can have an array of as many dimensions as you want. Typically, it doesn't go beyond 3 because people just can't comprehend 4 dimensions and above in their heads. All right? So there's flat and there's flat map. And again, there are some examples here. And you'll notice, I am purposely not going through some of these in depth. We will look at them because I think it'll make more sense to see them in code. All right? So what I'm going to do for tomorrow is I'm going to give you an example. We're going to write it twice. We're going to write it tomorrow and we're going to write it Friday. All right? I will give you the code, but I'm going to give you a hard copy of the code. All right? And then I'm going to ask that you key it in with me because it'll give me a chance to explain what's going on. But if you fall behind or you don't understand it or yours doesn't work, etc., you'll always be able to go back to the hard copy. All right? All right, so then they've got this. Guess what? It's the old test scores application. Remember this? All right. So you got all scores. You add them up and you divide by the total number of scores. You've got just the last 3. What does this mean? This means we're using unshift, right? Because we're moving the newest ones there. All right. So again, you could write this thing fairly simplistically and easily, I think. But with a JavaScript, again, they are using jQuery in here, but it wouldn't be that hard to un-jQuery this, so to speak. So notice they're pushing the new scores on, but when they are showing you this stuff someplace in here, they're using an unshift. All right? How to split a string into an array. So if I have a string that I put in there, hello there, how are you? And I've got a blank space between each word. Hello there, how are you? That would take a string with 5 words in it, and it would create an array out of it where element 0 would be hello, element 1 would be there, element 2 would be how, element 3 would be are, and element 4 would be you. Make sense? All right. So that's the split method. And again, they show an example right here. You have to have something to split on. If you don't, it just returns what you had originally. But quite often you use a blank space or a comma, or if you want to go through the parts of a date, either a dash, like a hyphen or a slash or whatever you're using. So as it says, the split method can split a string into an array. If it doesn't include it, it returns the entire string. If it's an empty string, it returns an array where each character in the string is an element in the array. Typically, you don't have to worry about that. How do you make a copy of an array? All right. Well, it says here's 4 ways. And guess what? There's even another way to do it than that. You could write a for loop and copy it from one to the other. That's the way you used to have to do it before they added these newer functions. So if you had an array with 1 million elements and you wanted to copy it to a new array, you'd have to use one of those for loops like we used before, and you'd have to say that the new element sub LCV equals, or the new array element LCV equals the old LCV type of thing. It was kind of a pain in the butt. But now, as it says, you can call the slice method, you can pass the array to the static from, you can destructure it using REST, you can use an array literal. So here they are. I will tell you that usually it's probably done more like this. All right. Now, I want to mention something to you quickly. We're almost finished with this. But before we do finish, the reason that I like to use let instead of const. Const will probably work in almost all the time and do what you expect it to do with an array. All right? But const supposedly at least, doesn't let you change the size of the array. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I've had it work and not work. I just use let. And I'm not saying you have to do that. If you write a test and you can use const and it works, more power to you. All right? Again, notice the from wasn't, this, it may sound like it, but really to say something 2015, if you don't know, I believe at least that ECMAScript has been around for about 30 some years. So it's just the last 5 or 6 where a lot of this stuff was possible to do. All right? An associative array, it's more like those key values. All right? So notice you use code. So this would be element 0, element 1, element 2, and element 3. Everybody see that? I gave you an example of this earlier. So let's say that I was going to create an array called states. I don't care that state 0 is Alabama, but I could say here AL equal Alabama, AK equal Alaska, etc. That's what an associative array does. So it says when you create this, you use strings as indexes instead of numbers. Now it says if you mix numbers and strings, don't do that. I can't think of a reason for doing that. All right? It says because elements with string indexes are actually object properties, which we haven't talked about yet, some of the array properties and methods don't work as expected. For instance, the length property returns 0 when you try to use these, and pop will return undefined. So there's other ways that you have to work with some of these things. Here's an array of arrays. That's what I call a multi-dimension array. So notice this. Does it make sense to you right here when we look at what's in gray? There would be 6 elements in that array. How do I know? I multiply the first one by the second one. All right? And with this, just so you know it, those 6 elements would be 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, then 1, 0, 1, 1. You get the idea. 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2. Does that make sense? Looks a little funky, but that's how you would basically refer to them in here. So it'd be like this. All right? And they show you examples. All right, I'm sure better than the ones I just did. It says, although JavaScript doesn't provide for multi-dimensional arrays, yes, it does. It just calls them an array of arrays. But they are basically a multi-dimensional array. All right. Now, this is a good place, I think, here to stop. Let me check real quick. So we're on page 488. Yeah, it looks like we've got about 10 or 15 pages to go. We're not going to spend much more time on it. Let's take a quick break today. Let's come back at 9:15, and I'm going to just finish this up then. All right?